someone's not going to be inspired necessarily by some really fast runner who looks nothing like them and they can never aspire to run the speed they run at. But they will probably look at that person who looks like them, maybe whatever their body shape is, whatever their athletic ability is, and say, oh, wait, if this person can do it, I can do it. That's the thing that gets somebody off the couch, because they've got to have that belief, Bishoy, that they can do it, that they could run a 10K or a half marathon or certainly a marathon. And it's the belief that gets the person off the couch and gets them to run that first half a mile, quarter mile, mile.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. This is a particularly special episode because if you've been following my story along from day one, you will know very quick how this is going to come full circle. Before we dive in, please be sure to hit subscribe if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Check out the show notes, pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. Now, without further ado, I have Rob Simmelkjaer. He is the CEO of New York Roadrunners. He became CEO in 2022. He is a two-time New York City Marathon finisher, native New Yorker, an experienced sports business executive, and government official. He has a record of leadership across a range of sports brands and media organizations. Prior to New York Roadrunners, he worked at ESPN, serving in positions of increasing responsibility and impact as Vice President of International Development, Vice President and Assistant to the President, and Director of NBA Programming. In 2011, he was named Senior VP of NBC Sports Ventures, where he led new business development and created and oversaw several NBC sports properties. He's a graduate of Dartmouth and Harvard Law School. He practiced law in New York City. He has two young daughters named Julia and Annika, and two hoodles named Mookie and Frankie. Rob, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Bishoy. That introduction always makes me want to cringe, but I appreciate the walk through my life history.
Of course.
It's great to be here with you.
Of course. Rob, for me, this is really exciting because I've gotten to know you professionally and personally, and I really want to share what it is that you're doing with the world. I think on the outside, and I've listened to a few other podcasts that you've been on, and I just know this from being around you, a lot of people associate New York Roadrunners with the New York City Marathon. But as you and I both know, New York Roadrunners is much, much bigger than just the New York City Marathon. So before we dive in and kind of address that, let's just give the audience a little bit of background. You're a New York native. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and your ties to New York.
Yeah, thanks, Bishoy. I kind of call myself a metropolitan New Yorker, lifelong. I was born in Manhattan, lived in the city till I was a pretty young kid, then moved to New Jersey. Spent a lot of my time in northern New Jersey, but went to 7th grade through high school in the city at a school up in Riverdale. Started running actually up there as well, cross country up in the hills of Van Cortlandt Park at Horace Mann School. Then went up to New England for college and law school, and then came right back to the city, practiced law, as you said, at some big New York law firms, and lived here all of my 20s and most of my 30s, actually all of my 30s, and then moved to Connecticut in my 40s, and I've been there for about 10 years. So yeah, I've kind of done the whole New York, New Jersey, Connecticut thing, and love this area, love New York. My family goes back many generations in New York City and Harlem and Upper Manhattan. So for me, this job is so special because I think it's really one of the most iconic institutions, New York Roadrunners in New York. It's been around since the 50s, and it's made such a huge impact on this city that the opportunity to sit in this position, to lead it, to chart its future, is to me like the ultimate New Yorker job, and so I'm really really thrilled. Other than maybe being manager of the Mets or something like that, I don't think there's a job I'd rather have in New York City.
Shout out to all the Mets fans listening. You guys got a lot to be excited about this year.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. So you mentioned that you started running early on throughout high school. I think it'd be interesting to kind of get your perspective on your own awareness and your own relationship with New York Roadrunners from a distance, even at a young age, given the organization's been around for some time. What was your level of awareness of the organization, and when did it start becoming a part of your life?
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about how we're more than the marathon, and that's true. But we also know that the first impression most people have of us usually is the marathon. And anybody who grows up in this area knows about the marathon from a young age. And I remember, very much, the days of, I'm old enough to remember Bill Rogers winning the marathon, Greta Weitz winning the marathon. I knew who Fred LeBeau was from all of that. So, certainly the marathon was on my radar screen from a young age. Although it's interesting for me, when I was really starting to run for the first time, my favorite distance by far was the mile. And I really was focused on and kind of had a dream, to be honest, to run the Fifth Avenue mile. I thought that was like the running thing to me. And I never really had a chance to run it as a kid. I wish I had. So the first time I ran it was in 2023 as CEO of New York Roadrunners. And I have to say, that was as much of a thrill for me to be at the starting line at the Fifth Avenue mile than just about anything I've done, because to me, that's really an iconic race. And I think it's so relatable for so many young runners, because that is the first real quote unquote run of any time, measurement that so many of us do, is that first mile in junior high school or even elementary school. So that's something I remember from a young age, is aspiring to run that race.
That's so awesome to hear, and it kind of gives us a different perspective than I think a lot of people would have expected. Um, and so naturally, my next question is: talk to me about just your relationship with the sport outside of the organization. Outside of what it's done for you, obviously in terms of the physical impact that it has. I have to imagine that it's played a bigger role than that in your life.
It definitely has, because I think the thing about running is, once you start at an early age, you can kind of come and go from it in terms of your competitive running, but it can always be there for you. It's always there as an opportunity for you to interact with and get what you need from it. And so, yes, I started running, the mile and running cross country when I was in high school. I never ran track and field because I was a baseball player, so that was always kind of off limits for me. But cross country and those things. And then once I went to college, I wasn't running competitively anymore through college, law school, but I would still occasionally just grab my running shoes and go for a run. I think that happened more as I got a little older, in my 20s, going to law school in Boston. I was fortunate to go to law school in Cambridge, Massachusetts at Harvard. And like, that is one of the great places to run. I think that's actually kind of what got me to fall in love with running again, is probably in my second or even third year of law school, I discovered all those running paths around the Charles River, and what a brilliant place Boston is for running. And I really did fall back in love with it. And it was my third year of law school, Bishoy, that on Patriots Day, the day that Massachusetts shuts down for the marathon, I went to the Red Sox game that day. Had got tickets, went to that game because of my love of baseball, and came out and saw the finish of the marathon there on Boylston Street. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. I've got to do this. And the very next week, I mailed in, well, snail mail back in 1997, for an application to run the New York City Marathon. And I got the application and followed the rules, mailed it in the first day you could mail it in. And I got accepted on my first try in the general drawing. And it was such a thrill to get that acceptance. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to run the New York City Marathon. And I trained that summer and fall, Bishoy, and this was when I was taking the bar exam, right? So that was when I really learned the power of running, because I'd be sitting there studying for 8, 10 hours a day for the bar exam. But I knew that run would be there to kind of break that day, lower the stress level, and make me feel like a human being. And that was when running kind of took on a different place for me in my life, because I realized how much the rest of my life could get from being a runner. And I think I took that experience of running while studying for the bar and kind of just stayed with that over many, many years. And sometimes there'd be years I wouldn't run any race, but I would run whenever I needed it. And I would dip in to run a half marathon once in a while, or 5K, or my favorite personal distance is 10K to run these days. I'd love to run 10Ks. But, now that I'm back, here at New York Roadrunners full time, I ran the marathon one more time in 2013. And then once I started working here in 2022, of course, I'm surrounded by it all the time. And now, of course, I'm running races way more than I ever did for many, many years. I think I've run at least 30 races since I've been here. And I've run 2 more marathons, as you know. So it's an occupational hazard of my job to start running marathons again, because I'm around them all the time. And that has definitely happened.
Well, you're putting up phenomenal times. I know that, you just ran Tokyo, and I've seen you run other races. I know you've trained and ran with Roberto. Roberto's been on the show. And so it's really, really phenomenal to just see you on both sides, both as a leader and as a runner yourself, and to kind of draw the parallels there, because I'm sure that a lot of the lessons that you've learned around your personal running journey have been incorporated with how you lead the organization. And I think that's, without a doubt.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I think the thing that every runner knows, and this is where I think marathons are so great, is the challenges that you always encounter, and the need to find ways to overcome them. The persistence that is needed for a marathoner, the perseverance is just unparalleled, right? And yes, running miles and 5Ks is so great and it's so awesome. And anybody who does that is a runner with my respect, and I still do those. But that journey of running the marathon is the one that I think you do get so many life lessons from, because nobody goes through that without obstacles, challenges, physical challenges, mental challenges, whatever they may be. And we all can take so many lessons from them that there's no question. I use them in my day job. I use that as a parent, and I use it in so many ways.
For context, that first marathon, how many runners were there?
Gosh, I actually, this is a great question. I think it was in the high 30s. It was a little bit south of 40,000 finishers in 1997. That marathon, Bishoy, was the rainiest marathon in the history of the New York Marathon at the time. It absolutely poured rain right at about the 3-hour mark, which is when I was coming down Fifth Avenue and all that. It was brutal. It was an absolutely brutal day. And I was happy to finish at all and finish with a time that was pretty decent. But that was part of what led me to run it again in 2013, was I wanted a nice day. And so 16 years later, this is one of my most, I think, proud accomplishments as a runner, is 16 years after I ran my first marathon, I ran 16 minutes faster. So I got a little bit older, I got a little bit better, and that was a real thrill.
One of the things that stood out to me when I ran my first New York back in 2017 was how an organization can handle the logistics of a day like that. And as a first time marathoner, I was just absolutely blown away by how smooth everything was. And now I've run 6, going on my 7th New York, and every year it feels like it just becomes more and more seamless with regards to how New York Roadrunners handles all the logistics behind race day. Back then, did you feel the same way, with regards to how it was handled, or was it still a work in progress as an organization?
I've always been amazed at how well the marathon has been run, to be honest. When I first ran New York back in the 90s, I didn't really have anything to compare it to. So I didn't know much about what it took. But over the years, I've run some other races, more local races, and I've gotten to appreciate even more the incredible logistics of our event. And we just simply have the best team in the business when it comes to this. Our events team is unparalleled. We have, from Ted Metellus, our race director, on down, people with incredible experience, passion, and attention to detail in everything we do. And we have a strategic plan here at New York Roadrunners in terms of the things we want to focus on over the next 5 years. The first in those five kind of pillars, as we call them, is best in class experiences. And we believe that the TCS New York City Marathon is truly a best in class experience. There's nothing like it in the world. You and I know wherever you go, all the Abbott World Marathon majors are amazing and special events, but we know, and I can tell you how many people come up to me at all those events and say, man, New York just nails it. You guys are just at another level. And that's no disrespect to those other races. They're all tremendous, but New York simply has a level we've achieved that, I think is still the standard in the industry.
Yeah, look, I get asked all the time now that I've done all 6, and the number one question I get is which one, was the best. And this is not, an answer because I'm from New York. This is not an answer because I have ties to the city. Quite frankly, it is, the most powerful race I've run, and it's why I continue to come back, because there is no city where you get an energy, a buzz, and you just feel so seen in a positive way when you're out on that course. And I've seen it as, a first time runner who had no idea what he was doing on that course, who didn't know if he belonged on that course, who questioned his ability to finish on race day, to now being a runner who's chasing down PRs and who's, setting bigger and bigger goals for myself. And regardless of who I showed up as on race day, I felt like I had millions of people cheering me on and pushing me to the finish. And that goes from the fans to the staff to the people on your team, from the very onset of the day at 4 or 5 in the morning until the race finishes. And so that's one of the true distinguishments of the New York City Marathon.
Yeah,
Uh,
we're fortunate, Bishoy, to have a lot of experience in history doing this race. This will be 2026 will be the 50th anniversary of the 5 borough New York City Marathon. And so that's a lot of institutional knowledge when you've been doing it for that long. And we've got a team that has become more and more experienced. And it's interesting. We have really seen, I think, our game improve significantly in just the last few years because the pandemic was a huge disruptive event for New York roadrunners. Obviously, we had to cancel a marathon in 2020. We had a marathon in 2021 that was only half capacity, about 25,000 runners. And the staff had been severely disrupted. We had to, unfortunately, the organization had to lay off a lot of people, furlough a lot of people. So when I got here in 2022, right after that year's marathon, a lot of people that year had been doing the marathon for the first time on our staff, or at least the first time in a while. And what we've seen in 23 and 24 is just an incredible growth in people's know-how and expertise because now they're doing it for the second and third time and they're anticipating things that come up, issues that might occur. So we're able to go that level deeper because of the experience. And experience is everything when it comes to putting on mass scale events like this because all the things that can happen, you have to not just be imagining them, but have lived through them, right? And know, okay, well, when this happens, you do that. And that is why I think we are so good at what we do right now.
I definitely have some questions for you about crisis control, and we're going to get there. But let me ask you, last year, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, 56,000 runners?
Yes, just over 56,000. It was an all-time record for this event in New York and any marathon anywhere.
And is there room for growth? Like, just so the audience understands and gets an idea, logistically, how big can this race get? Because as you and I both know, there's a huge waiting list for this race.
That is a frequent topic of conversation in our office is exactly how big the race can get. We employ some resources that help us model how big the race can be. We actually have a crowd scientist who is a consultant who looks at our course, our start area, our course, and our finish area, right? Looks at simply the space that's there and the time that we have. Because at the end of the day, it is actually a science. You've got number of people, space, and time. And those are simply the three variables that go into how many people you can have run the marathon. If you had 24 hours to run, you can have, who knows, 100 and something thousand people run, but we don't have 24 hours. We've got from the time the sun goes up and to the time it, not just goes down because we run past dark, but the time we can reasonably be operating on the first Sunday in November. We have issues around how long we can close the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, how long we can close all the various streets and roads, and just daylight, right? So that's basically a science. And the answer to your question is, we do think there's room for growth, but not a ton. I don't think this is going to be a 70,000 person marathon. Can we edge up close to maybe 60? Yes, we think we can if we do everything right and do it in a very thoughtful and deliberate way. But yeah, there's not a huge amount of growth that's available from where we are now.
Got it. I listened to you on Zach Clark's show recently, and you talked about, what led you to choosing New York Roadrunners. Again, if we were to replay your resume, you could have really taken your career in so many different directions. And this goes back to where I kicked off the show. Not a lot of people know the history of New York Roadrunners. Not a lot of people know that New York Roadrunners is a not-for-profit organization. And so, you clearly made a decision on your own, whether it was driven by passion, whether it was driven by a desire to be part of something, bigger than yourself. And so talk to us a little bit about, maybe give this audience a glimpse of what led to making that decision, and then parlay that into what the organization is about beyond the marathon.
I think a lot of people in their lives and careers probably go through this attempt to find the balance between making a living and having a career that provides for you and your family in the way that you want to, and also doing something you're passionate about and something that you think makes a difference. And for most people, the job is the thing that provides, and then there's things outside of one's job that give you the passion and the feeling of impact. And that's the way I was for a good amount of my career, especially when I was a lawyer. When I got into sports, I got closer because I love sports and I'm passionate about sports. And so when I worked at ESPN and NBC Sports for all those years, I was close to my passion. I really do love that area. And so I was fortunate to have that, but I was still working for for-profit companies at the end of the day. And what we were in the business of doing was making money. That's what we do at a place like Disney or NBC Universal. So there was still that disconnection, I think. And I was always trying to find ways to just make impact. And I was involved for a time in politics a little bit. And I was on nonprofit boards and things like that. And then something like Roadrunners comes along, and it is in line with what I've done for my career, right? I've been in the sports industry all these years, but it's a mission-driven organization, right? That is completely aligned with my values, with what I want to do with my life and the impact I want to make on the world. And so it was kind of like, wow, that something like this even exists for someone like me, and to have it all rolled perfectly into one. You couldn't really imagine anything better for me to draw my experience and my passion and my abilities, all at once. It was something I was not going to be able to turn down, right? So it's played out just that way, Bishoy. And then in terms of Roadrunners, you said it. I mean, so many people don't really know the scope of what we do. The marathon is one of 40 races that we put on a year. And that's not including the 20-something races just for kids that we put on every year. Not only that, but we have an entire community impact group that is all about making impact across New York City every single day of the week. And so we've got now this year over 200,000 kids in New York City public schools that are part of our Rising New York Roadrunners program that is getting them moving and active all the time. And that's against a backdrop of a school system that is woefully underfunded, that is constantly losing physical education opportunities for kids. Sports are being de-emphasized because of the challenges that the school system has just to educate our kids, right? So that's a huge gap that we're filling here in New York City and beyond with our Rising program. Then we got all these other programs that hit other needs. Open Run, which is a free running program in New York City parks. Every single week of the year, you can go to a park in any borough of the city, find a group that's going to run. You're going to run for free. You're going to run 5K. You're going to meet friends, get into running. It's an incredible entry point into running. We've got a program for older adults called Striders. And Bishoy, I don't know if you saw the United Airlines NYC half that just
I was
passed.
there. Yeah.
Okay, so we had this unbelievable viral social moment with a 79-year-old woman.
I saw that. Amazing.
Yes, Mildred, who was a part of our Striders program, and she ran her first half marathon at 79 years old and crosses the finish line, and you hear her say, "I did it," right? And tears start to flow. That happened because Mildred had been a part of our Striders program, which is mostly a walking program for older adults. But then many of them will decide, okay, I'm going to go from walking to run walking, or maybe just running. And Mildred made that transition, and here she is finishing a half marathon at 79 years old. So those are the kinds of things that we do. And I mentioned our strategic plan and the pillars. And one of those pillars is also telling the whole New York Roadrunner story so that more people really understand what it is we do every single day of the week. And that's why we have a podcast now, just like you, Bishoy. I host a podcast called Set the Pace, where we tell those stories, and we're doing a lot more in terms of content so that people have a fuller sense of everything that we do all year long. And the marathon is obviously our day in the sun and the spotlight here in New York City, but it's just one day out of 365 days a year that we're making an impact in New York and beyond.
Yeah. I think of stories like Mildred, and Kaylee Williamson's been a guest on this show. Her and her mom have come on not too long ago. And I think about stories like that. And then I try to put myself in your shoes. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that keep you up at night, being in your role. But, when you see humanity come alive through stories like that, there's no world where I can imagine the good does not outweigh the bad. I feel like, seeing humanity come to life throughout these stories, and seeing people persevere and seeing people learn about themselves in these ways is a true testimony to the sport, but really to you and the organization for enabling these individuals to find themselves on these courses.
This is the easiest job to get out of bed for that you could possibly find, to be honest. Like, I have no trouble getting out of bed. Now, partly it's because I usually need to get my run in first thing in the morning because I'm a morning runner and I need that. You've probably heard me say my signature phrase, win the morning, win the day, right? Get up, get that morning, run in, and it's always a good day. So I am just a morning person, but it is so easy to come to work because I know that every day we're going to be making somebody's life so much better, and not just one person, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. And I do think sometimes, and it's kind of awe-inspiring to think, especially as we have the run up to one of our big races, the half marathon or certainly the marathon, how many people at any moment are out there around the world running and moving their bodies and making themselves healthier, both physically and mentally, because they are preparing to come to the starting line of one of our events. And, especially in the months of August and September and October, there's not one moment of any day that someone's not out there somewhere in the world, in whatever their time zone is, running to get ready for the TCS New York City Marathon. And that's a pretty awe-inspiring thought.
If you know me, you know that I like to look good and feel good. As an endurance athlete who trains daily, I need my wardrobe to fit the mold. Roan creates performance-driven clothing for your active lifestyle. Each piece is designed for versatility and made with integrity to outfit you for an active life lived on your own terms. The Roan promise is to help you move forever forward. Use code MILE40 for 20% off online and in-store for new customers only. Visit www.roan.com, that's Roan spelled RHONE, or find your local store and move forever forward starting today. I love the buzz, whether it's Central Park or the West Side Highway in those months leading up to the race, because you start to see people out there. A lot of, and you don't know everyone's individual story, but you can see it, in their eyes and their pace. A lot of people are fighting to meet themselves and are fighting to learn what they're capable of, and that's a true testimony, because we know that the marathon is on deck there. That's incredible, Rob. When you think about New York Roadrunners, one of the things that you do really well, and I want to call this out again as someone who's been working with the organization now for 8 years in different capacities, and has been a part of different programs. It's a really unique capability to be able to run an organization that speaks to the most competitive of runners, right? Because you are working with the elites consistently on these high profile races. And at the same time, you're touching the hearts and minds of people who have never run a race before, people who, think they have to run a fast mile or have to have a competitive marathon time. And so, one of the things the organization does really well is inclusion, essentially, and kind of make people feel like they belong regardless of what their relationship with running is. And that speaks to the programs obviously that you've built, but I think there's more than that. There's a culture that's coming from within. Even when I speak to your staff, I do feel like I'm being welcomed regardless of who I am and what my running background is.
We have inclusion as a core value of the organization, and it's one thing to have that on a slide deck to say, yeah, our values are inclusion and diversity and all these things, but it's another thing to operationalize that. And we do operationalize that here. We have, an incredible leader, a chief diversity officer, Erica Edwards O'Neill, who does that day in and day out. And she and her team, ensure that we have policies that across the board invite people in to what we do. And, we spend a lot of time thinking about finish line cutoffs and, the kinds of images and people that we portray out there in the world running to make sure that we are not just portraying a runner as a skinny person who runs 6 minute miles. That's not what we're all about. We're about that, yes, because we love those elite runners, those sub elite runners, and they love us and they want to be a part of what we do. But we are just as much about them as we are about the person who crosses the finish line at 9 p.m. on Marathon Sunday, the final finishers, as we call it. And, we don't just keep the finish line open for those back of the pack runners. We celebrate them. We have a huge event in Central Park that starts when the sun goes down, essentially. And we call it Final Finishers. And we've got music and DJs and noise making devices. And it's a whole party out there on the West Drive late at night as those Final Finishers come in. It's one of the things that makes our event with the marathon and so many of our events so unique, is that we're really celebrating those folks because they are such a big part of our community. And if our goal is to inspire people to get up off the couch and run, someone's not going to be inspired necessarily by some really fast runner who looks nothing like them and they could never aspire to run the speed they run at. But they will probably look at that person who looks like them, maybe whatever their body shape is, whatever their athletic ability is, and say, oh, wait, if this person can do it, I can do it. That's the thing that gets somebody off the couch, because they've got to have that belief, Bishoy, that they can do it, that they could run a 10K or a half marathon or certainly a marathon. And it's the belief that gets the person off the couch and gets them to run that first half a mile, quarter mile, mile.
Absolutely. And you're I couldn't have said it better, Rob. I mean, I think you really summed it up well there. And it's a process of momentum when it comes to self-belief, and one step after the other leads you to slowly realize what it is that you're capable of. Switching gears a little bit, when I think about the operational capability required beyond the marathon, just to run this organization. And then I look at your background, and clearly you have the qualifications, but I have to imagine that you took on this role And it may have been even bigger than you thought it was because of the fact that there are so many stakeholders involved, not just in terms of the runners and the wide population of runners, like we just kind of alluded to, but the stakeholders within the city, the partners, the charitable organizations that you work with. And everybody wants to work with you and everybody wants your time, your organization's time, and there's only so much to go around. So talk to me a little bit about, how you were able to sort through that and maybe some of the background that you had that helped you there.
Yes, it is definitely a very broad set of stakeholders that we have, and it is sometimes a little overwhelming because a lot of people do want something, right? One way or another. And it didn't surprise me. I knew, I knew enough about the organization and what we do in the place we have in New York City that I expected most of it. I think there's been a couple of things I didn't expect in terms of like, just some of the folks who are coming at us sometimes looking for something from us in an aggressive way. But, for the most part, you could look at the Verrazano Bridge situation last year. But, I think for the most part, it's partnership, and it's people wanting to come and be partners with us. And they all have a really important part of what we do. And we want to make sure they all feel seen and heard and have a chance. And so the only way to do that, Bishoy, is just to have an amazing team because one person can only do so much, can only speak to so many people, right? And that's really, I think, the number one job of anybody in the role of CEO for a company of any scale or an organization of any scale is your number one job is the people that you put in the places that matter. Because if you put the right people in place, so much of everything else takes care of itself, because that layer of senior management that I'm responsible for, then if they're great at what they do, they put great people underneath them who put great people underneath them. And the whole organization works because you've got great people who are passionate about what we do, who have the right experience and qualifications and know-how, professionalism to get things done. And so that to me is my number one job. And I have a great team. I've been here 2+ years. So some of the folks who are here were here when I got here. Some of the folks who are now here are people I've brought in, right? And so there's always going to be a mix of that. And now I can honestly look at my team and say, this is a dream team. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And that makes my job so much easier. I can then choose the things that are big enough organizational priorities that they require my time and my attention, but know that everything else that I can't quite get to is being handled perfectly because of the team that we've got in place.
It's a really good call out. One thing that I can attest to in working with your team in different capacities, whether it's through Team for Kids and running the races, other marathons outside of New York, or whether it's through working with the folks in your office, everyone is glued to the mission. So it's one voice, which is really, really awesome. And so knowing that an organization works in unison like that is incredibly powerful, especially from the outside, because then this is how the organization operates, and this is what to expect from the organization. And so my next question, I know there's some things you can share, probably some things you can't share, but let's kind of use an example of a time you had to navigate a crisis or a difficult moment, whether it was, working through COVID or like you alluded to the Verrazano Bridge last year and the news that came out around that. And the reason I ask is the overall premise of the show is we bring on leaders such as yourself to help us channel the mindset on how to overcome different obstacles. And in your case, I think focusing in on your role as CEO of such a big organization, I'm sure you have no shortage of crisis moments. And so if you can give us an example of one and entertain us a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that in any difficult situation, you need to start with the point of view of a couple things. Number one, what is your objective, right? What are you trying to accomplish? Or, if it's something that you're not really trying to accomplish anything, but solve the problem, that, okay, what does a solution look like? Like, where are you trying to get to from whatever the situation that you're in is, right? And maybe it's a situation that was not of your choosing. Where is the other side of the bridge? What does that look like for you, right? And the other thing, Bishoy, that I think is really important in difficult situations, I can't stress this enough, is whether you can look at yourself and the position that you are taking and that your organization is taking and say that you're in the right, that you're doing the right thing, that your position is right and fair and credible. Because, you know, I won't go too deep, but like the Verrazano Bridge situation that was quite public, right? That was one where I knew our position was right and fair because I know the kind of impact that the TCS New York City Marathon has on the city of New York. I know how much it means to the city. I know the positive impact that we have even on the MTA, right? And the mass transit system here and how many people come to this city and ride the subways and ride the buses and what kind of positive impact that makes on the city. And so I knew, and I had a senior team and a board as well that I could pressure test with and say, hey, am I missing something here? Or is this a fair position for us to take that, we're not going to, write a check for almost $1 million every year to use the bridge, right? And so the answer was uniformly, yes, we're in the right here. So then it's okay. What are our tactics? How do we get through this, right? And you got to kind of make decisions along the way. You don't always know the way things are going to go. You don't know when something might break and turn into public news. You don't always expect it when some reporter calls and says, "Hey, can you comment on something?" Right? So you have to anticipate things that might happen and be ready for them and set yourself up along the way so that if anybody ever asks the question, hey, why did you do this or why did you do that? You can point and say, this is why, right? And something I talk about sometimes with people is when you're in a role like this that can be quite public, making sure you feel that anything you did, any email you wrote, any comment you made, if it was on the cover of the New York Times the next day, you could say, "Yep," and I'm okay with that. Okay, I feel like what I said here is right and defensible, and I'm not saying or doing anything that I would mind if the whole city knew. Right? It's that kind of thinking to ensure that you're never putting yourself and therefore the organization in an untenable position, that you're doing things the right way. I think that's so much of what you have to think about. And all that could be said of internal issues too. An employee who, is maybe having performance challenges or, a partner who isn't delivering based on what the expectations were. Like you always have to start with, okay, what's right here? Okay, what was a reasonable, fair expectation for us to have? Was that met? If not, what are we going to do about it to be fair? I think that's a lot of the way I think about things.
Thank you. That's an incredibly tangible answer and something that I think we can all walk away from this episode reflecting on because, we all have our crisis moments in our day to day. But one of the things that I think puts you in a unique situation is the fact that, as we alluded to earlier, there's a lot of eyes on you. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. And as much as you can point to that reporter reaching out, they're probably reaching out to your partners and asking them if they have comments as well, depending on what the situation is. And so, thank you for that. I know we have only a limited amount of time here, so one of the things that I really wanted to ask you was. I heard you speak at the Night of Champions the last 2 years, and I don't recall if it was last year or the last year before. I said hello to you and you introduced me to your daughter. And one of the things that's become evident from watching you from afar over the last couple of years is just how much pride you have as a father. And despite the fact that you oversee this huge organization that's doing all these big things and impacting so many lives, I feel like nothing makes you happier than taking a picture with your daughter at a Mets game. And so, speak to me about how the sport of running has impacted your ability to lead as a parent.
Thank you for that, and you're right. I always say being a father is the best job I have ever had, ever will have. Running is a great way to connect between generations. I first started running. My dad wasn't a big runner, but he definitely encouraged me to go out and run a 5K, run a mile, whatever. So he was encouraging of it, even though I don't think the two of us ran together that much. We were baseball people. We were a baseball family. So lots of Mets games with my dad, which you see when I'm at Mets games with my daughters as well. But for me, when I came to road runners, these youth races that we have are such amazing intergenerational events that I said, wow, this is a great opportunity for me to start running with my kids. And so I started inviting my oldest daughter, Julia, at first, and then my youngest daughter, Annika, to come run some of these races. And for Julia, it was great because it was the first time she'd ever really put a bib on, running a race beside other people, and it kind of opened her eyes to running, and she really took to it and fell in love with it. And now she's running cross country in her high school, just like I did. She's running cross country and playing softball, just like I played baseball. So it's incredible how similar our paths have been. My youngest daughter, Annika, she's less sporty, but that's another great thing about running is, I don't think Annie would ever say that she was an athlete. She doesn't like balls flying around. She doesn't want to throw or catch anything. She's more into stage, acting and theater and that kind of thing. But running is so universal that, I brought her out to the kids race at the Citizens Queens 10K last summer, and she ran our stage 2 race and she crushed it. She went out so fast. It was like a half-mile race, and me and Julia, it was out and back, and me and Julia were watching her sprint off the starting line, and we're like, oh man, she's gonna die out there. She's not holding anything back. And she turns around and comes back looking great, and she had a great experience with that, which I hope will stay with her and want her, get her to want to keep running, because it's so universal. And I don't think you have to feel like you have, eye-hand coordination or particular skill at hitting a golf ball or a softball or shooting a basket through a hoop to feel like you can run. That's what's amazing about it. And I think any parent has the opportunity to bond with their kid through running, or, even in some cases, kids who are, not able to run, our wheelchair training program and that form of racing as well is an opportunity for parents and kids to bond. So it's, I think there's something really special about it because you can do it together. And I know so many families where they have a race that's their race that they run every year together. Mothers and daughters who run the MasterCard Mini 10K every year for years and years, or families that run the Abbott Dash to the Finish 5K together the day before the marathon. There's so many great family traditions out there that really start with New York Road Runners races.
I love that. I love to hear those stories, especially again, just given the fact that um, you have a lot on your plate, but it's become evident, what means the most to you, to someone like me, who's again kind of closely pinned to what it is that you're doing. And to me, it empowers me to know that you put them first and they mean the most to you. And I just signed up my daughter for her first stage 1 race. She's 2.5. Uh,
Nice.
but like, you know, and I'm sure you would agree with me. I don't really care if she grows up running marathons. I don't really care if she, wants to compete. But I really love exposing her to this community because I think, through exposing her, it'll just open up her world to what's possible out there.
Which stage 1 race is it? Which race?
The mindful 5K in
Love
Queens.
it.
Yeah,
Out in Queens.
yeah.
I will make sure to get over there and maybe I can see her finish. Those stage 1 races are literally the cutest things on earth. I mean, you cannot get over how cute they are when these 2 and 3-year-old kids come running down. They're running like maybe 50 meters or maybe 100 meters. Some of them have their parents holding their hands along the way. Some of them don't, but there is nothing cuter than that. So I hope you
I'm
get
very, very excited.
lots of pictures, lots of video, Bishoy. Video is key. You must get good video of her coming across that finish line.
I'm very excited. And I shared previously on mile 40 after coming back from Tokyo, you know, my happiest moment was after finishing the race. She kept mouthing, "Daddy, I want to run a marathon." And I just thought to myself, "Oh boy, I don't know if you know what you're signing yourself up for." But hearing, you know, a 2.5-year-old say that really just kind of like it hit the heartstrings hard. So actually, a great parlay and a good way to end this, bringing up the mindful 5K. As we all know now more than ever, mental health is a grand part of running, right? Like what do they say? Running a marathon is 80% mental and 20% physical, right? And to see the organization embrace the importance of mental health, you know, I think speaks to not just the beginner runners, but also to the elites, because the elites will speak to the impact that running has had on their own mental health. And as an organization, I've seen that amplified a lot over the last 2 years since you've been at the helm. So I think to round things out here, talk to us a little bit about how running in general has played a role with your mental health, and how it's played a role with regards to how you envision the growth of the organization.
When I came here in 2022, I did make a point of talking about that right from the get go. In the very first interview I did, talking about this role, because at that time and still at this time, the country really was going through a mental health crisis. The pandemic was such a cataclysmic event for so many people in so many lives. It created a sense of isolation, depression, struggle for so many people, especially young people that were still really dealing with the ramifications of the shutdowns and the isolation that we all lived through. And so knew that that was something that was important to talk about very openly. And we've done that, and we've gotten better and better at doing that. And the Mindful 5K, which is in the month of May, Mental Health Awareness Month, is our kind of signature event that's focusing on the importance of mental health and the connection to running and physical activity. For me personally, running has always been by far the best therapy I have ever been able to come up with. I've tried, we all have, things you need to go through and deal with. And we've all tried different kinds of things, talk therapy, things like that. None of it has ever been remotely as effective for me as running, right? And I'm not someone who fortunately has had any, serious mental health problems that, some people have that and need real intervention and medication and things like that. But for the stuff that so many of us go through, you're down, you have a bad day, a bad week, you're struggling with a relationship issue or a work issue or whatever it may be that's on your mind. Like for some reason, running, and I can't explain it, how running seems to help me figure things out. Sometimes I like to run, especially if there's something that's bugging me. I try to run maybe with no music, because those are the times when I do get a little bit of that next level of thinking that's so hard to do when you're surrounded by devices and people and things that are making demands on your time. When you're out there running, nothing else is making a demand on your time other than you and your body and the miles that you're trying to cover. That's it. You can have a device with you measuring it. You can have a podcast going, you can have music going. Those things are all great, but none of them are demanding of you. None of them are asking for a response, because you can't. It's really hard to text and run, right? But you when you're running, it is about you and yourself and the road or the distance, and that, to me, there's something magical about that. Now, another side of it that I have been frankly surprised by. People ask me what has surprised me in this job. I think what has surprised me the most is the explosion that we've seen of people running together. And it makes sense, certainly, as I look back, because the pandemic did separate us, right? And people want to be together. And they're combining this love of running that so many of them found during the pandemic with the desire to be together with other people. And so we're seeing this explosion of run clubs. And that's been a huge factor in what has led to this, boom, frankly, of running that we've seen in New York and beyond, around the country, around the world, is running clubs. And now people are making these run clubs the center of not just their running life, but their social life, their dating life in some cases. Like, this is where it's at for so many young people. And how cool is that? That is not something that I really expected to see a run club. I forget the one where you wear black.
Lunge. Steve Cole's been
Lunge.
on this podcast. The
Thank you.
CEO has been
Lunge Running Club. You wear black if you're single, and that's a signal to others to talk to you. Like, man, that's amazing, and I think it's a fantastic thing, because it's the IRL, as the kids say, stuff that people meeting that way is so great to me. No offense to any dating apps or anything like that, but what a great way to meet other people, right? So that's the side of it that is a huge mental health benefit, because now you're moving and you're part of a community, and all the studies show that's what is most needed for mental health. The Surgeon General has come out in the last couple of years and said that loneliness is an epidemic in this country, and that it leads to a higher risk of things like dementia, heart disease, and all kinds of things. And so if we're now not only moving our bodies, but doing it together, that's magical. And that's something that really is changing all of our lives together.
Absolutely. Rob, thank you so much for bringing it home for us, for keeping it real, for really, letting us in on just the holistic impact this sport is having. And, on behalf of myself, the listener base, I just want you to know how grateful we are for the work that you do to lead this organization, and the work that your team does day in and day out. Everybody, not a lot of people know this, but planning for the New York City Marathon probably starts the day after the New York City Marathon. And so, that's a testament to you, your staff, the work that you do, the commitment to it, and also the commitment to reaching people far and wide, regardless of run level, regardless of background. And so I just want to say thanks for the time, and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you. And don't thank me. When you're out at one of our races, you see one of our staff members wearing one of the blue jackets or shirts, thank them. Thank the volunteers as well at those races. Thank those folks, because they're the people who are making it happen. But it's been great spending some time with you, Bishoy. I appreciate that. And hope to see you and your 2.5-year-old daughter at a race very soon.
You will see me soon. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.